Democratic State Senator Nathan Johnson of Dallas, thank you so much and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Good to see you, Jack.
Good to see you. And so I wanted to ask you, what did you make of this nearly $7 million judgment filed by a Travis County judge against the Texas Attorney General's office in the whistleblower case?
It's been a long time coming, Jack. These were dedicated state employees. Whatever ideological differences they might have from anybody else, they were serious, dedicated employees. They were wrongfully discharged for performing their duties and acting ethically. I feel for them. I feel for what they've been through, and I think that they've finally seen a just result.
Now, we know that the Attorney General has said he is going to appeal the judgment, but in your mind, do you think that lawmakers should fund the judgment? Should they pay for it, which means taxpayers would pick
Which
up?
means taxpayer dollars. When you look at the injustice of asking taxpayers to pay for the wrongdoing of a public official, it's galling. But you also have to look at it from the standpoint of somebody who works for the government, who's dedicated their life to public service and has been wrongfully terminated by the government itself. And for the government then to say to you, as a wrongfully terminated public servant, sorry, we're not going to pay your damages, strikes me as even more galling. So I do think that money to pay that settlement has to come from the Office of the Attorney General. Now, when you look at the Attorney General's overall $1.5 billion budget, a $6.7 million judgment to see that justice is done is not so much. And as far as money that's just freed up, they have a $640 million undedicated general revenue budget. They can pay this, and with a little less waste out of the Attorney General's office, I think there's plenty of money to pay these settlements.
And one thing that I can't help but bring up, because just in the whole history of this case, there was a settlement reached back in 2023, in I think it was February, and the lawmakers chose not to fund that, and then that led to the impeachment investigation, which led to the impeachment trial. And we just found out that all of the costs associated with this are more than $12 million. So there could have been a settlement for 3.3. Now it's 6.7. And then you add the cost to the House investigation. The Senate had to spend about $435,000 with the trial. So talk to me a little bit about that. Should the legislature should have just funded the settlement? Both sides reached an agreement?
Yeah, if you're asking me for the integrity of our government, if we should have just said, you know what, let's pay these guys off. Let's give them 3.3 million and not investigate whether or not there is an abuse of power within a state agency. I would say no. I think that it is worth the public's money to investigate the abuse of power, to go through the impeachment process. The fact that it did not result in a conviction in the Senate does not mean it is not a worthwhile investment of the public money to hold the government accountable.
And do you think, so if you think, given the circumstances, you would do this all over again?
Yes, I would. I would hope for a different result, but I think it was worth that is a proper thing to be doing. The government should be investigating government abuse of power, for sure. Sweeping it under the rug is not the ethical option, and it's not ultimately in the best interest of the public.
And one of the things that one of the whistleblowers' attorneys said is Paxton, the Attorney General, never had to go under oath, never had to answer any questions, not in this lawsuit, but obviously he didn't testify, not that he had to, during the trial. So what do you make of that?
You got to be a lawyer to get into too many of the details of rulings and whether or not he had to testify, but I think the whole thing's a travesty. I think that the public was denied the ability to know really what happened. And I think that the Attorney General's office was able to sidestep justice in this whole process. That's why it's all the more important that the impeachment proceeding was pursued and that we had an impeachment trial in the Senate. That the public deserves to know what's going on. It's a shame that the legal proceedings did not open the door completely. And I think that's also, those closed doors to information are probably what also resulted in there not being a conviction following the House impeachment.
And where do you see this going as far as, do you see, I know there was a lot of discussion about, changing the law as far as how impeachments are prosecuted by the legislature.
Yeah, impeachment's a funny animal, right? Is it a political thing? Is it a judicial thing? And it's really both. And there are no set rules in the Constitution. And every Senate, every time there's an impeachment, every half century or so, has to make up a new set of rules. Is that the way it should be? 50 years from now, the world's going to look different. I'm not sure I do want to set down the rules that they're going to have to follow 50 years from now. Nor, frankly, Jack, do I trust this legislature to write the rules that are going to be good for all time. So I'm not in favor of a dramatic overhaul of the way we approach this. If there are ways we can set down a few standards that would give people more faith in the process and that would make it more effective and that would make it more difficult for people to avoid being called to justice, I do support that. I have my apprehensions about this legislature doing that right, however.
Why is that?
Well, look at what happened in this trial.
And you're talking about the fact that uh, Lieutenant Governor really was the judge in this case.
I personally, if I were to make a rule, I would make sure that we have a clearly disinterested party preside over the trial. That's just one rule. But when I say I don't trust this legislature to manage the process, I'm not sure that the rules that get written are going to reflect a just process. I'm just not, Jack. I wish I could. I wish I did believe it, but I don't.
Let's talk about 2026. We see a lot of openings with the Attorney General now deciding he's going to challenge Senator John Cornyn for the Republican primary in the U.S. Senate. That opens, obviously, gives a lot of possibilities for Democrats in that race. It also opens up the Attorney General's office. And so I'm wondering, are you thinking about running for higher office?
Most of what I'm thinking about is getting my bills set for hearing in session right now. I'm also thinking about higher office. I am, Jack, at this point. I think we need some balance in politics, and I will be examining whether or not I can bring that.
And which particular races pique your curiosity?
There are options, Jack, and if I get curious enough, we'll find out.
All right. And so let's talk about one of the bills that was passed by the Texas Senate, which requires local law enforcement to work with ICE and federal authorities as it relates to immigration. How did you vote on that and why?
I voted no, Jack. It is currently an option for any county to work with the federal government, in effect, kind of like putting your own sheriffs under the direction of the federal government when it comes to immigration activities. And while it's a legitimate place to form a partnership, that should be in the discretion of the local law enforcement authorities. The main reason I voted no, Jack, is we have some precedent to look back on here. The last time the federal government had this kind of program where they sort of conscript the services of local law enforcement was under the Obama administration. And it was almost exactly what the Trump administration is offering and what this legislation would compel large counties to accept. And it failed, actually. They terminated the program because law enforcement realized it was detracting from their ability to carry out their duties. There was huge mistrust among the population and law enforcement. They were taken away doing federal immigration enforcement instead of protecting the citizens that they're elected and hired to protect. And so the whole thing was terminated. And the irony here, Jack, is that I've been trying to expand Medicaid. What's this have to do with it? I hear over and over again that's a failed federal program, despite the fact that it's a demonstrated successful federal program. In this case, when we're talking about these 287G immigration agreements, it's a demonstrated failed federal program, and yet the state's trying to do it. It doesn't make sense, so I'm a no.
And it's our costs also,
Huge costs.
we always hear the term unfunded mandate.
Yeah.
Does this bill that did pass in the Senate provide local law enforcement with money to do this.
Not the big cities, not the big counties, Jack. It is a classic example of an unfunded mandate and of an unfunded mandate, and it is at meaningful financial levels. What's stunning is that the amount of money that is allocated for this program is new border enforcement money. It is not subsumed within the $6.5 billion that the state has set aside, again, for border enforcement. While I might add, Donald Trump is in office coming after immigration, the border security issue, and illegal immigration is at its lowest point since 1960. And still, out of that 6.5 billion, we're not paying for this 287G program. So I think it's a case of unfunded state mandate to the counties and just kind of the bloating of our expenditures at a time when revenues are declining. Just on fiscal prudence alone, I'm not sure. I don't think this is a good idea.
You brought up the $6.5 billion that the Senate and now the House has included for border security. Do you think that should be reduced, given the fact that far fewer people are coming, lowest levels of people crossing the border illegally that we've seen in decades?
Let's just examine what the governor himself said, that when Donald Trump is elected, the state can pull back on these border enforcement efforts. The way our expenditures have been justified, and I have long been on record as saying that the border is a state issue and it is justified to spend state money on it. The question is the scale, right? We've spent multiples of what we've ever spent in the past. Our governor said with Trump in office, we can pull back, and yet we're not. The federal government is now supposedly doing its job. I hope they're doing their job. And in the past, every administration has not done their job. That's what was used to justify these huge expenditures. Now the feds are in there spending the money. Immigration is at a low. The governor has said we can pull back in those circumstances. I don't know why we're not, particularly when the legislature is racing ahead with very expensive things. Hopefully we race ahead with some very expensive school funding. Right? That's yet to be completely determined. But we're trying to do things with property tax relief, water, school, health, other infrastructure items. I think we need to ask ourselves whether it's fiscally the right thing to do to continue funding our border enforcement levels where we had in the past.
Nathan Johnson, state senator from Dallas, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack.